Hands-on, using the step-by-step approach to create an icon. I'm going to guide you through a step-by-step process on how to create an awesome camera icon in Photoshop. This is a custom graphic you might want to use in a website design. We'll cover custom graphics in more detail a bit further down the road. This is pretty easy to replicate, but the video is not intended to be a follow-along. Instead, I recommend you first try and create the camera graphic by yourself without the help of this video, and only after that you should watch this lecture. It will make a big difference if you do it that way. Then create an identical replica of what I'm about to do. The video is going to be fast-paced, so we don't spend hours on it. I suggest you watch it once to understand the essence of it, and then when you want to replicate it, make sure you pause frequently. Okay, let's get started. Step 1. Document settings and the background. Make a new project with the following settings. Width and height 1000 pixels. Drag into your project this and this image that you can find on unsplash.com. When you place them, make sure you enlarge them substantially so they go outside your canvas both horizontally and vertically. Then apply a generous Gaussian blur of 125 pixels. Repeat the process for the second image. For the layer on top, lower the opacity to 80%. If you see any white parts, that means you should further enlarge your images, either directly with Ctrl-T or by going back before you applied your Gaussian blur. Add a hue saturation adjustment layer with the following values. Hue 312, saturation 59, lightness 0, colorize is checked. Our background is done. Feel free to remove the initial background layer. Step 2. The icon base and texture. For the icon base, we'll use the rounded rectangle tool. Click once on the canvas and input these settings. Width and height 512 pixels. Radius 90 pixels. Place the rectangle in the center of the canvas and use the following layer styles. Bevel and emboss. Style inner bevel. Technique smooth. Depth 100%. Direction up. Size 32 pixels. Soften 11 pixels. Angle 120 degrees. Altitude 30 degrees. Highlight mode screen. Color FF, FF, FF. Opacity 75%. Shadow mode multiply. Color 81, 81, 81. Opacity 24%. Stroke size 3 pixels. Position inside. Blend mode normal. Opacity 100%. Fill type color E3, E3, E3. Gradient overlay. Blend mode normal. Opacity 100%. Gradient from 747474 to DD, DD, DD. Angle 90 degrees. For the bottom part, we'll use a nice leather texture that you can download from here. Put it above our main rectangle. Hold Ctrl and click on its thumbnail to make a selection. Then add a layer mask. Now our icon has a nice texture on its bottom half. For this layer, we'll add the following layer styles. Bevel and emboss. Contour should be set at 50%. Style inner bevel. Technique smooth. Depth 10%. Direction up. Size 5 pixels. Soften 0 pixels. Angle 120 degrees. Altitude 30 degrees. Highlight mode screen. Color FF, FF, FF. Opacity 45%. Shadow mode multiply. Color 000000. Opacity 75%. Inner glow blend mode screen. Opacity 15%. Color FF. Technique softer. Source center. Choke 0%. Size 207 pixels. Satin. Blend mode multiply. Color 000000. Angle 0 degrees. Distance 9 pixels. Size 103 pixels. Drop shadow blend mode normal. Opacity 43%. Angle -90 degrees. Distance 2 pixels. Spread 0%. Size 0 pixels. Step 3. The lens. Start out with the circle of 384 by 384 pixels. Center it on the icon and apply the following layer styles. Stroke, size 10 pixels. Position inside. Blend mode normal. Opacity 100%. Fill type gradient 000000. Location 0%. 5F, 5E, 5E. Location 34%. 000000. Location 73%. 5F, 5E, 5E. Location 100%. Style linear. Angle 90 degrees. Outer glow blend mode normal. Opacity 34%. Color FF. Technique precise. Size 2 pixels. Let's add some text to our outer circle. I'll write "This looks great.net camera icon" with the following settings. Font Roboto Light. Size 13 pixels. Tracking 60. With a gradient overlay from 969696 to FF. Warp the text with these settings. Style arc. Horizontal. Bend -54%. It depends on the amount of text. Horizontal and vertical distortion 0%. Repeat the process for the top text but change the bend to +20%. Next, we'll create a series of circles to create more detail. Circle 1. 311 by 311 pixels. Color 222222. Outer glow. Blend mode normal. Opacity 34%. Color FF. Technique precise. Size 2 pixels. Circle 2. 304 by 304 pixels. Color 222222. Stroke. Size 2 pixels. Position inside. Blend mode normal. Opacity 100%. Fill type color CE. Circle 3. 299 by 299 pixels. Color 222222. Bevel and emboss. Style inner bevel. Technique smooth. Depth 1000%. Direction up. Size 4 pixels. Soften 0 pixels. Angle -90 degrees. Altitude 30 degrees. Highlight mode screen. Color FF. Opacity 32%. Gradient overlay. Blend mode normal. Opacity 100%. Color 272727 to 3E 3E 3E. Reverse checked. Style linear. Angle 90 degrees. Circle 4. 256 by 256 pixels. Color 222222. Inner shadow. Blend mode multiply. Color 000000. Opacity 75%. Angle -90 degrees. Distance 5 pixels. Choke 0%. Size 16 pixels. Drop shadow, blend mode normal. Color FF, FF, FF. Angle 90 degrees. Distance 1 pixel. Spread 0%. Size 3 pixels. Circle 5. 235 by 235 pixels. Color 222222. Inner shadow. Blend mode multiply. Color 000000. Opacity 75%. Angle -90 degrees. Distance 5 pixels. Choke 0%. Size 16 pixels. Purple effect. 225 by 225 pixels. Color 222222. Bevel and emboss. Style inner bevel. Technique smooth. Depth 1000%. Direction up. Size 5 pixels. Soften 0 pixels. Angle 90 degrees. Altitude 30 degrees. Highlight mode screen. Opacity 0%. Shadow mode multiply. Color 8E19BA. Opacity 75%. Stroke. Size 14 pixels. Position inside. Blend mode normal. Opacity 100%. Fill type gradient. C011E6. Location 0%. C259D2. Location 11%. 9C26AE. Location 21%. 3C0245. Location 100%. Style linear. Angle 90 degrees. Blue effect 1. 197 by 197 pixels. Color 222222. Bevel and emboss. Style inner bevel. Technique smooth. Depth 1000%. Size 5 pixels. Soften 10 pixels. Angle 90 degrees. Altitude 30 degrees. Highlight mode screen. Opacity 0%. Shadow mode multiply. Color 284CE5. Opacity 75%. Stroke. Size 9 pixels. Position inside. Blend mode normal. Opacity 100%. Fill type gradient 10B9F1 to 051737. Style linear. Angle 90 degrees. Inner shadow. Blend mode multiply. Opacity 75%. Angle 120 degrees. Distance 5 pixels. Size 29 pixels. Satin. Blend mode multiply. Opacity 50%. Angle 0 degrees. Distance 11 pixels. Size 35 pixels. Blue effect 2. It has the same settings as the first one except the size, which is 180 by 180 pixels. Interior circle. Size 166 by 166 pixels. Bevel and emboss. Same as for blue effect 2 layer. Stroke, size 15 pixels. Position inside. Blend mode normal. Opacity 100%. Fill type gradient 02304F to 0A357B. Style linear. Angle 90 degrees. Inner shadow blend mode multiply. Opacity 75%. Angle 120 degrees. Distance 5 pixels. Size 29 pixels. Satin, same as for Blue Effect 2 layer. Gradient overlay, blend mode normal. Color from 000A14 to 0048BF. Opacity 100%. Style linear. Angle 90 degrees. After that's done, we're going to convert this layer into a smart object. And then we'll add a lens flare effect. 50 to 300 mm zoom. Shutter. Create an octagon by using the polygonal tool and set its size to 60 by 60 pixels. Gradient overlay, blend mode normal, opacity 100%, color from 000000 to 282828, style linear, angle 90 degrees. Then use the line tool set at 1 pixel to create 8 lines around the interior circle. Once you're happy, merge them all together, lower the opacity to 40% and change the blending mode to soft light. Finish up this area by adding a 25 pixel circle with a color of 090C10. Step 4. The finishing touches. Create a 299 by 299 pixel black circle. Lower the opacity to 68%, change the blending mode to overlay and add a layer mask. Swipe a few times until you get a similar result. Create a 265 by 265 pixel white circle. Lower the fill to 40%, change the blending mode to color dodge and add a layer mask. Swipe a few times until you get a similar result. Create a 292 by 292 pixel white circle. Lower the opacity to 10% and raise it up until the bottom part touches the bottom part of the octagon. Then hold Ctrl and click on Circle 3's thumbnail to make a selection. And then add a layer mask. Remember, you need to have the original layer selected. Create a rounded rectangle 524 by 27 pixels with a radius of 10 pixels. Then add a 10 pixel Gaussian blur and position it above our background layer. And we're done. Let's take another look at our final result. So now that you've watched me create this icon, it's time you rewind the video, pause it frequently and replicate the camera. It's one thing to watch me do it, it's another to create it for yourself. So please take the time to perform this exercise. All the values you've seen me put in I got from trial and error. Of course I left that out so we could shorten the video. Good luck with it. All about wireframes. I previously described my design process and you've heard me say I use sketches. Those are actually named wireframes and they're representations of what you need to design. Like I previously said, you're not a business consultant, thus you don't need to know the ins and outs of the business. You don't know exactly what functionalities are needed to be covered in the website, so for that we use wireframes. These sketches take away a lot of the unneeded work. You and the client agree on an initial sketch and then you get started. If the client isn't happy with your first proposal, you can adjust the wireframe within minutes. The same can't be said about the design. If you miss some core functionality or some element the client was expecting, you may need to start the whole thing over. Skype or Google Hangout are shady pitfalls because of this. You don't recognize the trouble until you're in way over your head. Communicating directly is great for establishing a close work relationship with a client, but when it's all said and done, you need things in writing. You need lists, you need sketches, you need wireframes. You can't get into an argument over the design where you say, "But don't you remember when you said you wanted this like this?" That's not the way to go, even though you may be right. It really doesn't matter at that point. The client isn't happy, and that's that. So take all imagination or interpretation out of the brief. Talk to your client and establish fine-tuning details at the end of the project, for the last revision maybe, or talk in broad strokes about the project deadline, his budget, and things like that. At the end of the day, everything should be in writing, but without a wireframe, you're designing with a major handicap. Let's have a look at a wireframe so you can better understand things. As you can see, this is made for an e-commerce website, and it's one of the better ones. It features lots of details, so you can see some real work was put into it. Ideally, this is what you should be basing your work on, but don't expect the client to come up with something so rigorous, so meticulously done, because you're in for a bad time. It's far more common you'll end up with a wireframe that looks like this. As you can see, this is miles away from the previous one I showed you, but you have to make it work. Moving on, an important question is, who should create the wireframe? Well, this depends on a lot of things. In general, when you're doing design contests on sites like 99 Designs, you're more likely to have a wireframe. When you're pitching your services to a client, then it's up to you to help him out with a wireframe. An example usually works wonders, so always have one available so you can pass it along to your client. If he's a bit older or doesn't know his way around the computer too well, then you might not be surprised to see some unrealistic sketches. Keep in mind your clients don't know web design, that's what they hired you for. In their wireframes you may see 5 or 6 columns of content in one row, but they also want their design to look good on a 13-inch laptop. That's unrealistic, but it's your job to guide them. So to sum it up, always work with a wireframe. Wherever reasonable, ask for a wireframe by first providing an example. If the client can't manage or refuses to put the time in, you have to decide whether to drop the project or continue by creating a wireframe on your own and then sending it for approval. If you choose the latter option, you should expect several wireframe revisions and amendments. What can you use to create wireframes? That's another common question. Well, every design program can make a wireframe, even Microsoft Paint. You can even use a pencil and a piece of paper. I recommend you check out the following site for a complete list of free wireframing tools. As always, the link will be attached to the course. If that doesn't work for you, simply Google free wireframe program and you're going to find lots of options. If you want to create a wireframe in Photoshop, you can do so quite easily. Open up your 960 grid file and start by placing a black rectangle on the screen. Lower the fill to 0% by going to the top of the Layers panel and sliding it all the way down. Then access the Layer Styles dialog by hitting the small FX icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. Select Stroke, leaving the settings as they are except Position, which should be set to Inside. We now have our first element. This can act as our logo. Open up the guides with Ctrl:/, and position the element next to the outer left one. For more clarity, get the Type tool and write inside the shape. Please note the current mouse cursor. This is not what you want. If you click to type, you'll see you'll be writing bound by the edges of the shape. It's better practice to hit Ctrl-Shift-H. This will hide our anchor points, and now our mouse cursor will have a new icon. Now you can type in logo. Use your smart guides to center the text inside the shape. You'll see it will actually snap to the center position. If that doesn't happen, then go to View and make sure Snap is checked. Same goes for Snap to. Make sure all the options are checked. After we have our first element, we can simply duplicate it with Ctrl-J, or hold Alt with dragging the two layers. Then use Ctrl-T to resize and rename your next layer. Let me speed up the process to show you how you can create a simple wireframe by repeating these techniques. As you can see, I'm constantly doing the same thing. I'm copying my elements, resizing and renaming them while making sure I'm still within my 960 grid. I like to space them out correctly by using the tools up top, but we'll talk more about that later on. One thing to keep in mind is this: don't follow the wireframe too closely. This is a trap you might fall into unwittingly. In the quest of making the client happy, you might follow his directions too literally. Going back to our example wireframe, things seem pretty much sorted here, right? But does this mean you have to follow it exactly as it's laid out here? Of course not. This is something that happens a lot on 99 Designs. Designers simply follow the wireframe too closely, and the clients receive 10, 20, 50 designs that all look the same, give or take a color scheme or some minute design elements. Wireframes are indications of what core functionalities have to be included, yet nothing is written in stone. You're hired as a web designer for your expertise, for your decision-making, not just to color inside the lines. So you have to know when to listen to your client and when to disregard his input, because again, you're the expert. Going into a bit more detail about this specific project, we have a categories panel on the left side. Should you move it on the right? I doubt it, since this is how most websites are laid out, and that's for a good reason. Should the category expand underneath, like we have in electronics, where flat panel TVs, digital cameras, etc. are underneath the heading? This is up to you. You can easily change that. You can make it open to the right side in order to minimize the panel's expansion. Should the Have Any Questions area be placed underneath this categories panel? No, not really, but again, it's up to you. You have to understand that most elements are flexible. So please don't follow wireframes like they're directly from God himself. Take them as suggestions and use your judgment to decide what should be changed and what should be followed literally. Okay, this is enough for now. This is how our wireframe looks, and it only took us a few minutes. If the client doesn't like a part of it, we can easily adjust, or for that matter, we can actually make another one in 5 to 10 minutes. Of course, you can add more details to it. For example, you can specify if something is a slider or if something moves, in order for the client to better understand the wireframe. Now it's time for you to create your own one. Take a look at cnet.com and create a wireframe based on its current layout. Even though it's pretty easy to do, it really helps to have a PSD file with wireframing elements. Please take the time to perform this exercise. Include as many details as you see fit. Working with a brief. Briefs are what separate designers from mind readers. A brief is usually a document of some sorts that contains all relevant information about the project you're about to take. Usually a good brief will have a wireframe attached to it, but it's not a rule by any means. You should expect to see the following: company name, company information, existing website if any, competitor websites, comments regarding how the site should be structured, a logo in vector or PNG format, and so on. When you ask for a brief outside a platform like 99 Designs, you can expect to see varying information. Some clients rely on very short briefs, thinking this won't limit your creativity. That or they might be lazy. On the flip side, some clients feel the need to compensate for that book they never wrote, so you can expect pages upon pages of every single detail in the website. Both options are terrible for us designers. What you need to do, again, outside a platform, is to create a brief template of your own. This should include all the information you need to get started. I recommend you work on your own brief, both on presentation and content. I don't want to include an example of my own because this needs to be an individual thing, something you can put your own identity and branding upon. So take the time to create something visually appealing that also has everything you need. A simple Word document is fine, but you can also create something in Photoshop and export it as a PDF that can later be filled in by the client. The big questions should always be asked. How many pages do you need? Provide a logo in a PNG or AI format. Do you have a preferred color scheme? Who are your competitors? Which of them have the best design? How about functionality? And so on. The idea is to get as much information as possible, but without forcing the client to take the whole day off to fill out your form. Think about the absolute musts in order to keep the time down to a minimum. Your form should be easy to understand, written in plain words without any over-extravagant design, preferably in a universal format like PDF or doc, or you can use whatever you think works best for your client. These are almost universal though, so they're pretty safe. I understand some people are extremely busy and they don't have time to waste, but you always need something to work on besides a simple conversation. It's either a brief or a wireframe with a few links to the competitors' websites, and maybe the existing website of the company. In case the client comes up with some excuses in order not to fill out the brief, you have two choices. You can drop the project because the client is clearly not a dream to work with, either too busy, too lazy, too arrogant, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Or the second choice is to considerably increase your quote in order to accommodate for the inevitable revision work you'll have to do. Either way, be prepared for a lot of stress. In most cases, you won't face situations like this, but if you find yourself too often under these circumstances, you might want to reconsider your approach. Maybe you're asking for way too much information. Maybe your brief has complicated terms. Maybe the design is too distracting, or possibly the client can't open up the document. Think about all these things if you see a pattern emerging. For example, if you see a block of text like this, you'll surely be discouraged to read it. If it were better formatted, things might be different. The same can be said about your brief. You can also simply ask for feedback on your document in case you have doubts about it. Most clients will be happy to give their 2 cents about it. I also need to mention one thing. There should be a clear distinction between a brief on a crowdsourcing platform like 99 Designs, CrowdSpring or even Odesk, Freelancer.com, Elance and so on, and one-on-one briefs. So if the client gives you a specific set of requirements, you should consider them more than the equivalent crowdsourcing site demands. This is because you have no competition. On the other hand, if 10, 50 or 100 other designers read the same brief, most of them will produce the same design. In that case, you need to come up with your own twist, with your own interpretation. Try and stand out from the crowd. Try and imagine what everybody else would do after reading the brief, and try one-upping them. It's critical you understand this point because otherwise you'll be left struggling. In both cases, though, I recommend you take the client's requests lightly. But even more so in the case of crowdsourcing projects. Simply put, you shouldn't give his brief too much credit. So if he asks for a Web 2.0 design, I might ignore that. Flat design? Again, I might ignore that as well. No stock photos? Why not? So I'd question everything based on my knowledge. I don't want to create a design custom fitted to his ideas. Instead, I want to create an awesome tailor-made design for his business needs. Again, this doesn't imply I'm a business consultant or that I'm a specialist in that particular field. No. But if I've made 50 other websites like that one, you can bet your house I know a thing or two about it. This is where things get tricky and very hard to explain. You don't want to be arrogant, but you do have to use your judgment wisely. This is a matter of finesse and subtlety. The subject is so delicate I've never read any tips like this from anyone else. It's quite a harsh thing to say. Disregard the client's brief or wishes. It may come across as being arrogant, abrupt, or simply too harsh. But that's not what I'm saying. You should take his points into consideration. But at the end of the day, you have to use your own judgment and experience to make design decisions. Let's expand on the example I gave. The client says he doesn't want stock photos. He hates them. As a side note, this actually happened to me. After considering everything, I decided to use some very nice photos. Not your everyday cheesy shaking hands stock photos, but images from a website like Shutterstock nevertheless. The client loved it. He hated the tacky, overused ones that were all over the web, the ones with 5 business people in cheap suits, 1 black, 1 Hispanic, 1 Asian, 1 white, 1 woman, the one where they're all at a meeting. This is why I recommend you think twice before following the brief to the letter. I know this is something that's quite easy to misunderstand, but nevertheless it's an important part of being a freelancer and mastering web design. So if it's a crowdsourcing website, don't give it too much credit, use it very loosely. If it's a personal client, give it more thought, but still don't follow it to the letter. So to sum up, never work without a brief and/or a wireframe, and make sure you're asking for the right information in your document. Also, never get too hung up on the client's wishes. Instead, use your own experience and judgment. The role of imagery, stock photos, and free photos. Photos are our main tool when it comes to creating a big impact. Custom graphics are on the same level, but we'll talk about them a bit later on. The quality of your images is very important, and that brings us to the first question. Where can you get high-quality images? The answer isn't simple by any means, but the easiest way to go is stock photos. These are professionally edited images hosted on stock image sites like shutterstock.com or istockphoto.com. What's great about these sites is the vast amount of images they host. Some sites have millions of files for you to choose from. The downside is you have to pay for them, and this brings us to the next problem. What if the client doesn't like your choices? The solution is to only buy them after the client approves them. In the meantime, you'll have to use watermarked images. What does that mean? A watermark is an effect, usually a pattern of some sort, that covers the picture with the stock site's logo. The effect is usually very subtle, but that varies from site to site. In this example, you can see we have this diamond pattern along with the site's name, in this case Dreams Time, and some more pronounced swirly bits. That's the watermark. There's another section underneath that gives us additional information about the file ID, but that should obviously be removed. This isn't the biggest problem though. The size is where it's at. This watermarked preview is usually very small and thus unfit for big sections like the hero area. You can try to stretch them out, but that will pixelate the image into oblivion. This is an example from istockphoto.com. They're one of the biggest names in the business. When you download a preview, this is all you get. Nothing big by any means. And obviously when you enlarge it, you lose quality. Your best bet is to create a free account on dreamstime.com. This isn't a top-of-the-range website, but it does allow you to download bigger previews. That's what you previously saw in my first example. Sure, the watermark is still there, but the bigger size makes all the difference. Dreamstime is one of the very few sites that provides big previews. This can actually be used in most circumstances without any hesitation considering its size. Ideally, we'd want to use clean images without any watermarks, but sadly, this is all we have regarding stock photos. There are other solutions out there, but nothing that I can stand strongly behind. This leads us to another important question. Who should pay for the stock images? In general, you should include this into your price, but it really depends on the project. I like to be very clear and upfront about my price, so no matter what you choose, make sure the client knows it from the get-go. Bigger clients like you to take care of everything, so you can justify a higher price by saying they don't need to worry about stock photos, custom graphics or artwork, fonts or anything like that. It's all included. But if you choose to make the client pay for your images, make sure you always provide a list similar to this one. Name, business balance. ID 32765821. Site dreamstime.com. And you should also provide the URL. This way the client can easily find and purchase the image. It's also good practice to search for the lowest price. It's in your best interest to keep the client happy by making him pay the lowest amount possible. Another thing you may be asking yourself is this: what does royalty-free mean? You might search on Google for something like free stock photos, but you'll be disappointed to find sites that require you to pay in order to use their images. You might even see free in their title. So how does that work? It's simple. They refer to the images as royalty-free images. That doesn't mean they're free to use. That simply means you don't have to pay a fee every time you use that image. For example, some of Michael Jackson's images can't be used without paying a royalty to its rightful owner. Don't confuse the owner with the person in the image, in this case Michael. The owner can be anybody. So when publishers want to use a certain image of him, they have to reach out to the owner of that particular image, negotiate and pay in order to use it. The royalty that must be paid can be linked to a certain time frame, to a certain number of units, to a certain print format, etc. So when something is royalty-free, that means you purchase it once and there are no strings attached. Even so, it's always important to check the website's terms and conditions to fully understand what you're dealing with. For our web design needs in general, you have nothing major to worry about, but I suggest you choose 2 to 3 sites you like to work with, read up all the terms, and then you'll know what each of them implies. This way you can help your clients and steer them in the right direction. This will score you some nice bonus points regarding your thoughtfulness and engagement in the project. If you don't want to use any stock sites for whatever reason, you can browse some free galleries, though I should warn you in advance, the difference in quality is huge. Free photo websites aren't that many, and some of them have a tiny archive. The problem here is finding the right image for you. The search algorithm is either poor or the images aren't properly tagged. This means if you're looking for business, you should also search for corporate, serious, suit, and anything that's in that range. Don't expect the same results as in stock photo websites. In general, I take them one by one and quickly browse through all the pages. It's very time-consuming, but considering your imagery can make or break your site, you shouldn't settle for less. As with fonts, the more you use them, the better you'll come to know them. It's the same with these sites. You'll start to form a mental database of their collections. So if you're looking for something very creative, you'll narrow your search down to only 2 or 3 websites. If you're looking for something abstract, maybe it's only one site that features those type of images. The important part is that you use them constantly. The more, the better. Here are some of the sites I use for free images. 1. The formerly known stock exchange, or sxc.hu. It's now called freeimages.com. This is a pretty good site, but some files require an account. It's very easy to register though, so it's really worth it. It features over 400,000 images, but you really need to look for the good ones. Their search engine, while not amazing, is one of the best among free photo websites. 2. Morguefile.com. Even though this sounds very creepy, Morguefile is a massive online gallery that features very big images that are left to rot, so to speak. They're free to use, but you will need to adjust them to make them work in a professional design. In general, a bit of lighting correction, color adjustment, and shadow improvement gets the job done. 3. Unsplash.com. I love Unsplash because it has some great top-quality images. My only gripe is that they don't update it often enough. It's top 3 in my book for sure. 4. imcreator.com. This is a recent discovery for me. It seems to feature very nice images as well as other things that a designer might find useful. Definitely worth checking out. 5. publicdomainarchive.com. Big archive, lovely photos, enough said. 6. picjumbo.com. This gallery even has a Photoshop plugin priced at a convenient $12. I'm not affiliated with them, but it sure is tempting. The images are great, nice big size, and their quality isn't too shabby either. A great source overall. There are some other ones, but I'll just give you a list so you can browse through them as you see fit. The list will be attached to the course, so you don't need to write any of these down. What you'll find through these websites are images that are high quality, yet some of them lack any professional retouching that stock photos usually have. That means the shadows, the tones, the vibrancy might not be premium quality. So again, make sure you adjust your expectations going into it. A question I often receive is this: are images from Google okay to use? No, they aren't. If you're really short on time, you may use them as placeholders, as temporary images, but you shouldn't use them in your final design. And if you're trying to showcase a particular style to your client, make sure you make it clear that the images are stolen, because that's exactly what they are. These images are most likely stock photos someone else has purchased, and now you're simply stealing them. And if that's not the case, then consider the quality issues. You won't find anything great on Google. And if that's not enough, think about the final design. You can't possibly give your client a PSD with images that come from unknown sources. That's far beyond any grey point. So no Google images. I have to mention that they introduced a new filter where you can find images tagged for reuse with or without modifications. But in general, you won't find anything good there. They're mainly images from Wikipedia, and it's not a habit you should pick up. Overall, your best bet is to use dreamstime.com for watermarked images, or any other stock photo website that offers big previews. The free galleries require a bit of effort, but the more you use them, the easier it gets. It's your choice to combine the two sources in order to get the best out of your images. Good luck. Custom graphics. This is the salt and pepper of a website. By custom graphics, I'm talking about the use of color, patterns, typography, and imagery, all combined to transmit a message. Let's look at some examples. As you can see, this has some blocks, some people might call banners. These combine color, nice typography, custom artwork, and a button in order to obtain an action from the user. This far surpasses the alternative of a simple block of text plus a title. With these custom graphics, the website gains character and personality, and that translates into a happier user. This is what clients want, a designer who is able to tailor-make graphics specifically for their needs. Of course, these take up considerably more time, and in the case of revision work, you'll have even more to do, but the end result is well worth it. This is what clients mean when they say they want a modern website, or they want the site to pop. They don't know the right terminology, but in essence, they want custom graphics. Let's take a look at another example. This is highly recommended by clients as a go-to site for inspiration. Why is it so loved by our clients? Yes, you guessed it, it's the custom graphics. These crisp, well-defined images are stealing the hearts of both users and clients from all over the world, because most sites simply make do with plain text and headlines. Those may be the bread of the site, the actual content, but these graphics are the cheese, that little extra that when added takes everything to a whole nother level. Imagine mint.com without these images, or see it with stock photos of business people shaking hands. How do you feel about the website now? See, the problem is stock photos are really overused. The same old images show up everywhere, and it's become a tacky, cheesy thing to have on your website. Most clients with lots of web experience will say they don't want stock images whatsoever. There are actually articles out there about the most hated stock photos at the moment. Do yourself a favor and read up. Those who have a bit of experience in web design will immediately recognize them. By the way, I have to mention I seriously dislike slideshow articles. One of the worst things ever created. Browsing through these, I'm sure some of them look familiar. That's a bad sign from the get-go. So the solution is to create these custom graphics. But how do you do that? Well, it's not easy. For starters, you have to analyze sites like mint.com to see their structure, how they lay things out. After you have a clear idea about what's needed, you then need to start working. Nothing will help you except practice and then the step-by-step approach. This is why my site, thislooksgreat.net, has all sorts of freebies, from clocks, headers, backgrounds, to pencils, robots, illustrations, and so on. It's my place to practice and show off my work. Some are better than others, of course, so your best bet is to start early and improve as you go along. There's no real guideline except to take it step by step. Deconstruct your end result into small, manageable pieces, and always use inspiration. Things like the Mint's locker are particularly difficult to do, but with the new flat trend that's going around, you can do something like Market did. These three graphics are quite easy to do when you break them down, and by using pure flat colors, you don't have to worry about making them feel realistic. Alternatively, stock photo websites offer some of these illustrations, but they look horrible with watermarks on them. It's a very different story from watermarked images, so I recommend you stay away from them. Your last option is to use freebies off the internet, but this isn't an optimal solution. Matching multiple freebies among themselves and to your design is a real issue. Actually, if you need more than one graphic, it's very likely you won't find all of them in the same style. Consider how much time is needed to find freebies that match your design, that match between themselves, in the right perspective, with an adequate color scheme, with the right license. Well, you're actually better off designing them yourself. It's a similar process to finding free, high-quality images on one of those free gallery sites I previously mentioned. It takes a lot of time initially, and with time you can get better at it. The main difference here is that this isn't a long-term solution. Scavenging for freebies isn't something worth putting on your resume. I can't stress it enough how important it is that you develop your skills in this area. Custom graphics will set you apart from your competition by miles and miles. I believe this is the future of web design, and this is how you can make a big jump from earning a few hundred, maybe a few $1,000s per month, to earning over $10,000 regularly. Yes, over $10,000 per month. It's this type of skill that's very looked for, so your quote should increase alongside your quality. Sadly, there's no replacement for hard work. There's no easy way to go about it, you just have to practice your hands off. This is quite tricky because you're now entering a world of drawing and illustrations that's a bit away from web design. Thus the challenge. You need to achieve a balance in your work where you do your job, whatever that may be, and then on the side, you develop your new skill set. It's a big step that will likely take you quite a bit of time, yet if you're serious about web design, I believe this is your best shot. I'd even sacrifice learning how to code in order to get better at this. Hell, I've actually done that. I still have a very long road ahead of me, mainly because I've been multitasking between my business, my design work, and my efforts to improve my skill. But with constant work comes constant growth, so I'm very happy about it. So that's my take on custom graphics. They're really needed in modern web design, and your best bet is to start practicing as early as possible with the step-by-step approach. When you get good enough, you'll implement them in your designs and your clients will really appreciate them. That translates into higher asking prices, which means better business for you in the end. We need to practice, and quite a lot. So let's do another exercise. Let's replicate an icon we previously saw on marked.co.za. Hands-on, creating custom graphics. In this video, we'll be creating some fairly simple custom graphics to get things rolling. We won't be doing anything too detailed or intricate because that's not the object of this course. Even if I included hours upon hours of me creating this and that, you'd see me perform virtually the same handful of actions over and over again. Like I previously said in the other video, it's up to you to analyze graphics you see on great-looking websites, break them down, and figure out the thought process behind them. Then implement those findings into your own library of knowledge and practice hard. With that out of the way, I have only one thing left to mention. Like with all exercises, you should try to perform the task without seeing me do it. So this is your chance to pause and create these 3 icons in Photoshop however you see fit. Take as much time as you need, and it's up to you if you want to create a perfect replica or just something similar. If you don't have the time to do it, simply skip over to the next video. After you've done the exercise, come back to this point and see my take on it. So, this is your last chance. Okay, so we have to create these 3 icons in Photoshop. I'll only do the first one in order to keep the video fairly short. I won't try to perfectly replicate it because that would be more time-consuming. The end result will be very similar though, so let's get started. First, the circle. I'll add one of the icons into my 1000 by 800 pixel canvas to have a sense of things. This flat green is pretty nice, and as we can see, the other colours are in the same range, so they all go together quite nicely. We should also notice this document goes outside the icon area, which adds a nice detail to it. So let's get the ellipse tool and create a perfect circle. We can either drag while holding Shift, or we can simply click once and enter our dimensions. I usually go with the first option, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to input my measurements manually, 185 by 185. To create a flat colour, I have several options, but I'm going to do this. Double-click on this thumbnail to bring up the colour picker, then sample this green. Next, move this slider up and down without modifying our initial position on the left side. I'll stick with the colour code I already know, 5B82C3. And that was obtained through this very same procedure. For the document part, we'll use the rectangle and my measurements will be 80 by 95 pixels. Again, in general, I'd use the drag approach, but I want this end result to be exactly like the one attached to your course. I'll position it 10 pixels above our ellipse layer. For the bottom part, which has this pattern, I'm going to use the pen tool to add 7 points along the bottom edge of the rectangle. To help me do that, I'll add vertical guides 10 pixels apart, starting from the edge of the shape. I'm going to zoom in really close and do that one by one. We could manually input the guides, but I prefer to drag them from the side and use the measurement on the screen to perfectly position it. This is one way of doing it. You can, of course, use any technique you want. After all 7 guides are well positioned, we'll use the pen tool. Make sure you see the initial 4 anchor points before you get started. Use the direct selection tool to bring them up. Then with the pen tool, make sure you have this plus symbol on your cursor and click on the intersection between our document layer and our guide. After you've clicked, hold down Alt while still being on the pen tool to use the Convert Point tool. Click once and you're good. Move on to the next one and repeat the process. Click once with the plus symbol, hold down Alt and click again. Do this for each one of the 7 intersections. After that's done, get the direct selection tool, select one point, and with the use of Shift and the up arrow key, move it 10 pixels upwards. Then repeat the process for every point. I know this may be a little bit difficult for some of you, but take your time. Rewatch the video, pause it several times as you work along, and you'll get the technique. After you're done, we're out of the woods. That was the most difficult part, even though it was more tedious than anything. For the document lines, get the rectangle tool and draw one that's 60 pixels wide and 4 pixels tall. Make sure it's white and have it bang in the center of your document. The distance from the top should be 10 pixels. Then duplicate it with Alt and Shift and position it 8 pixels underneath. Repeat the process until you have 4 lines. For the stamp, things are super easy. Use the rectangle tool to create a circle which should be 10 pixels by 10 pixels and white. Then duplicate it with Ctrl J and enlarge it to 16 by 16 pixels. Drop it underneath our first circle in the Layers panel. Then lower its fill to 0% and add a stroke. Just change the color to white. Reposition these 2 layers if needed. It's time to clean up our Layers panel because things are getting messy. First layer should be called Inner Stamp, and the one with the stroke should be Outer Stamp. Rename these 4 shapes to Line. You can use copy-paste if you want, then group them into a folder. Rename that Lines. The dark blue layer should be called Document, and the main circle should be called BG. Okay, let's move on. The jacket and shirt parts are a series of rectangles, so let's get started. Get the rectangle tool and draw one that's 38 pixels tall. The width doesn't really matter because the next step is to create a clipping mask. So press Ctrl, Alt, G. This is how the Layers panel should look. Again, this is one way of doing it. There are, of course, other ways too. To change the color, we're going to sample the document and move the slider down, this time from the left part. The color code I went for is 273956. A darker shade of blue, nothing fancy. Center the new layer horizontally inside the BG layer. Then take it down 20 pixels with the help of the Shift key. Create a new rectangle, this time 5 by 34 pixels. This should be white and it should be centered vertically with our previous layer. For the button, use the ellipse to create a 3 by 3 pixel circle. Change its color to that dark blue we previously used, 273956. Position it in the middle of our white rectangle, horizontally, and leave 2 empty pixels from the bottom. Okay, renaming time. This last layer is called Button. The white rectangle is Shirt, and the blue one is Sleeve. Duplicate this last one and make the clipping mask. Use Ctrl T to resize it so its height is only 7 pixels. Then use the color picker and choose a lower value. I went with 202F47. Rename this to Sleeve Shadow. If at any point you're not happy with the progress, feel free to make adjustments. For example, you may want to extend the entire thing more towards the center of the BG layer. To do that, select the button, shirt, sleeve and sleeve shadow layers and move them a few pixels to the right. Adjust it as you see fit. Next, we'll jump to the credit card and leave the hand for last. The credit card can be done with the help of the rounded rectangle tool. The size should be 75 by 50 pixels, and the corner radius should be 5 pixels. Regarding the color, we'll use the same one as for the document, so sample that and you're good to go. Add a rectangle that's 75 by 8 pixels. Make it white. Then place it 10 pixels from the top edge. Next, add another rectangle, 16 by 3 pixels, white again. Position them on the right side of the card. With these little details, you can make your own judgment call. It's fine to play around a few pixels here and there. Duplicate the layer until you have 3 lines, and make sure you have the same height between them. Then use the marquee tool to check the spacing on the top, right and bottom so they all match. Lastly, add another rectangle, this time 16 by 10 pixels. Again, make sure the positioning is spot on. 1 pixel off might slide, but starting from 2 pixels on, things are noticeably wrong. Ideally, you should have the same spacing throughout. Tedious, yes, but it's well worth it. Now for the hand, the part that some of you may dislike. We'll use the pen tool here, but make sure this setting is on shape, not on path. Now it's time to get clicking. I really don't have a step-by-step guide here, you simply have to click and see what happens. Try it a few times and you'll get better each time. It can be frustrating, but you have to be patient. If you're having a particularly hard time, you can trace over the inspiration image. I won't be doing that since I like the struggle, but in the case of some very difficult shapes, I might use a Google image to trace over. Obviously, it's far better you practice without any guides, but we all have to start off somewhere. After you've made your shape, change its colour, this time use a light cream yellow colour. This isn't particularly related to any other colour we've previously used, but it should be a skin tone. I'll go with EE-EA-D5. If you don't like how it came out, you have to use the pen and the direct selection tool. Go in and out, reposition anchor points, create new ones, delete others, do whatever you need to do in order to get it right. I know I haven't covered the pen tool in this course, but you will need it on rare occasions, sometimes in custom graphics. This though is more towards illustration work than web design, so I decided to leave the theory part out of it. You've already seen most of the uses anyway, so hopefully we can move ahead. One thing to remember, press Enter while on the direct selection tool to make all the anchor points disappear. Use Ctrl-Shift-H to make them appear. Let's clean up our layers panel again. For the hand layer, we'll name it Hand. For the thick white line, we'll use Big Line. And for the three little ones, we'll group them as they are and call them Little Lines. The white rectangle should be Square, and the card background should be Card BG. Now group all the card layers into one folder and rename it to Card. Great. Lastly, I want to touch upon a small detail you might have noticed. In our example, the hand has its thumb on top of the card, while the rest of it is underneath it. This makes for a nice effect, even though it's not very noticeable. Let's do the same thing to our icon. Select the hand layer in the Layers panel. Then hold Ctrl and click on the thumbnail of the Card BG layer to make a selection. Next, hold down the Alt key and press on this mask icon. Lastly, get a brush, any of the basic ones will do. I'm using this second one, but you can use anything you like as long as its hardness is set at 100%. Now with white as the foreground colour and the mask active, start painting over where the thumb would be. This reveals it, and now we get that nice effect we were looking for. Make sure you're painting inside the mask and not on the layer. There's a clear difference between having the mask selected and having the layer selected. And that's our custom graphic. I know it wasn't the easiest thing in the world for some of you. Take it slow, rewatch the video, practice, and you'll get the hang of it. Remember, this type of work requires a very different skill set to what most web designers have. So be patient, work hard, and results will follow. It's up to you to balance your work schedule with this new time-consuming task. I strongly recommend you create the other two icons. The same principles apply. Do your best, take your time, and if you find yourself stuck, Google is your friend. If you can't find anything helpful, just contact me and I'll do my best to help. Good luck. Alignment tools. The alignment tools can be found at the top of Photoshop above our canvas. These are incredibly useful in every single web design project because it allows you to precisely position elements on the canvas. With the updated Smart Guides in Photoshop CC 2014, our job is made even easier. Yet these tools are still a must-know in any situation. In my recent venture, I had interviewed over 50 designers and less than 10% knew how to use this panel. Hell, most of them didn't even know it existed. Now, I'm sure part of this information is very well known for some of you, but others might not be aware of it, so let me break it down. The alignment tools always need at least 2 elements selected in order to make an adjustment. Let's jump over to another tab. Here, when we have only one layer selected, all tools are closed because we're missing the second element. Obvious. When we select the entire canvas with Ctrl A, we now have 2 elements selected, and this entire region lights up. Not all of it, because for this other part we need at least 3 things selected. Notice we don't have to have 2 different layers, a selection is considered an element too. So Photoshop shows us the available options since the main condition of having at least 2 elements selected is met. If you simply click and observe each icon, you'll immediately understand what they do. Great, so far so good. If we now have 2 shapes selected and we use the tools up top, Photoshop will move them accordingly amongst themselves. Nothing too complicated. We can easily explore all the icons by simply moving the layers around and clicking again. If you don't see this panel, remember you need to be on the Move tool. Okay, to distribute horizontal centers, we need to have 3 layers selected. This makes them spaced out correctly and precisely on the x-axis, or horizontally, thus the name. Please note that this feature doesn't work well with text layers. So if you have a main menu with several items that you want to evenly spread out, this is not the way to go. Let me demonstrate. I'll move this last menu item to the side, and then I'll use the Distribute Horizontal Centers command. As you can clearly see, the spaces vary a lot, so the result is inconsistent. Your best option is to have all the items in one text layer and copy-paste the space between them. Crude, but effective. This gives you the best results no matter what, so don't use any of these tools on text layers since they won't give you good results. Some other important things to know. Say we have these 2 shapes positioned exactly as we want them, except we need them in the exact middle of the canvas. If we have them both selected and press Align Horizontal Centers, they will center themselves between them. If we have both layers selected and we select the entire canvas with Ctrl A and then hit the same Align Horizontal Centers, the shapes will be in the center of the canvas, but they will lose their previous positioning. To make sure you keep them as they are, you have to first group the 2 layers. Now you have 2 things selected, the canvas and the group. Use Align Horizontal Shapes, and there you go. This is really useful when your project is loaded with lots and lots of layers and groups. Let's take a look at a pricing table, for example. This is to show you a real-world application. We will space each column out with the use of Shift and Smart Guides just to illustrate some manual labor. We're going to take our time with it, so it'll be perfect. Now, if we want to have them in the center of the canvas without ruining our previous positioning, we should group them all and use Align Horizontal Centers. And now they are indeed in the center of the canvas horizontally. You can also align vertical centers. Then simply right-click the folder and hit Ungroup Layers. That's the basics of the alignment tools. They're very useful in every single project, so make sure you fully understand them before moving forward. Symmetry, proper spacing, and white space. We love symmetry. It's in our blood and we're drawn to it like kids to mud. I'm sure you've seen lots of programs on the Discovery or History Channel where they say our ancestors had the same passion for symmetry as we do. That's why so many monuments and even cities have it implemented in their design. The same can be applied in web design. There's a saying that you should like a site even if you see it out of focus from across the room. That can only be achieved through an appropriate color scheme, a great layout, and proper spacing. And that layout must bring balance to a design in order for the website to feel right. Notice the emphasis on feel. If you're a freelancer, I'm sure you've heard a client say at some point something along the lines of, "Well, it's okay, you've followed the brief, yet somehow something seems off, but I can't put my finger on it." Most likely, this is the culprit: balance. To balance a design, we need to use proper spacing between all elements and position them accordingly, so the site is as symmetric as possible. This is why we're actually using a grid system made out of columns with exact spacings, rather than just approximating things. The principle is this: maintain consistent and adequate spacing throughout the entire design. Sounds simple enough, yet it requires a very meticulous hand. The first thing we need to do is understand what are the best tools for the job. First, we have the arrow keys in conjunction with the shift key. You need the move tool active for this, of course. Press any arrow key once and you'll move the layer by 1 pixel. Add shift and you'll move it by 10 pixels. This allows us to quickly space elements in increments of 10 pixels. There's no limit to it, so you can space things out very quickly with this feature. Let's jump over to a new tab to see things better. The idea is you move one square next to the other one until it snaps into place, until it touches the other one. Then you use shift to space them out. 3 times means 30 pixels. It seems overly simple, but it's actually a technique I constantly use. To use it effectively, we must first make sure we have our smart guides enabled. Move any layer around and you'll see pink lines appear. Those are your smart guides, and you should always have them on. Go to View, Show, Smart Guides, and see if that's checked. These will help you position your elements perfectly, and it's very reliable in older Photoshop versions. Another thing you should know in regards to proper spacing is how you measure your distances. I work with the marquee tool non-stop. This is one of the fastest ways to measure distances because it instantly shows your coordinates. W stands for width and H for height. Of course, we have this new measurement feature where we hold Control and hover over another layer to see the distance between them. That's fantastic, but keep in mind this is available only in Photoshop CC 2014. You can find out more about it in its dedicated section in the Photoshop version comparison lecture. The alignment tools up top also help us quite a lot with our spacings, but since we just talked about it, I won't get into it again. So those are our main tools for measuring and spacing things out. The arrow keys in conjunction with the shift key, the marquee tool, the latest measurement tool available in CC 2014, and the alignment tools in the top panel. To better illustrate how important it is to have precise spacings, we'll see some examples where you have to choose which element draws you in, which one you prefer. This is our first one. Which one of these buttons do you prefer? 1 or 2? Choose fast, there's no thinking here, you've got to act fast, so 1 or 2. Okay, if you chose 1, then you're on the right track, and that's because the text inside the button is perfectly centered, both horizontally and vertically. The one on the right is actually offset by 2 pixels to the right and to the top. This is a pretty exaggerated example, believe it or not. In general, you'll be dealing with only a 1 pixel difference, which will be harder to spot, but as time goes by, you'll become a regular hawkeye at it, for all you MASH fans out there. Let's go to another example. It's the same situation here. Which do you choose? Again, the one on the left has perfect spacings, while the one on the right is a bit sloppy. Let's take the marquee tool and see what we have on the left form. For the headline, we have 33 pixels on the top side. On the left, we have 33, and on the right side, 33. But if we select the headline layer and then hold Control while hovering over our white background, you can see it's 32 pixels all over. If we go to the edge, we can see why that happens. Photoshop gives this text layer 1 extra pixel to the side. That's no big deal since we can clearly see we have consistent spacing throughout it. The difference lies within the tool you use to measure it. In general, you'll use only one, either the marquee tool or this new feature in Photoshop CC 2014. So for that reason, you won't have inconsistencies. Let's check out the call to action button. I'll use the control method from now on since it's a bit faster. Yep, 33 pixels on each side. How about the distance between the fields? It's 20 pixels, absolutely everywhere. Between them, between the header and the first field, between the last field and the button. So even though this design isn't anything magnificent, It's correctly laid out. If we jump onto the right form and use the same technique, we can clearly see lots of variations. The headline has an empty space at the top of 24 pixels, but if we check the bottom, we can see that has only 20 pixels. The same goes for the gap between the headline and the first field. That's a whopping 28 pixels, but that value doesn't show up again. This is something you have to first master before you move forward. Like I previously mentioned, these aren't incredible designs, yet because they're laid out, they're not terrible either. By simply following these rules of symmetry and consistency in spacing, you set yourself up for success. You create a solid base on which you can then build. This is one of the most common mistakes designers make, and it's actually one of the easiest to correct. It's not particularly hard, it's just a bit boring. But once you understand the power of it, you'll have no choice but to do it, and with the help of the tools I presented, you'll be flying through them in no time. It's far more difficult to repair an out-of-sync design, so the secret is to create them perfectly from the start. Directly related to symmetry, proper spacing, and design balance is white space. It's also called negative space, and it simply refers to the empty room you leave in your design. Some might say that's lost space, but as you'll see in most cases, less is more. Apple is a good example of white space use. I'm not a big fan of the brand, but the site is a good studying point. As you see, there's lots of empty room. A magazine editor in the 90s would go crazy from seeing this so-called wasted space. They'd much rather have the site look like their front cover of their magazine. That may work in that particular field, but in web design, things are very different. White space has a very important role. It creates an elegant look to the site. It lets the custom graphics shine and become the hero of the page. Going back to Apple, look at the copy. By the way, copy is another word for text, just in case you aren't familiar with the term. Look at how little text we have. This is white space in action. When we remove it, let me pull up a design without generous spacing. Look at what happens. Disaster. All of a sudden, the typeface isn't that interesting, is it? The product images start to lose their premium feel, don't they? That's how vital white space is to a design. This has always been an important design principle, yet in most media formats we've been accustomed to lots of crowded content. Think of magazines from 5 to 10 years back. They were packed full of info because somebody probably thought they'd lose money if they didn't use every single square inch on the page. Again, that might have worked for them, but these things don't translate into our design field. When you go upscale, you'll usually see a more refined touch and subsequently lots of white space. Look at the Mercedes ads, for example. The car, which is the actual content, is the hero, and thus it occupies the majority of the space. The rest of it is just there to support the hero. A background that doesn't try to take the spotlight, a bit of copy that informs without being in your face. This is a good example. Don't think about white space as literal white space. It can be any colour. What matters is you leave sufficient room in your design. This is the complete opposite of clutter. Lots of clients have adopted this term, cluttered, and for a bit of time I didn't know what it was. To put it simply, it means crowded. This can be seen in lots of places, from copy to button design to complete websites. Let's have a look. Which of these two buttons do you prefer? You should be pointing to the one on the left, since the text doesn't occupy most of the button real estate. Yes, it's a call to action, and yes, it has to stand out, yet by making the text inside it too big, we lose valuable aesthetics points. Regarding copy, this is going to be discussed a lot in our typography chapter, but to illustrate the point, choose one or two. Which one do you prefer? Which one would you rather read? The answer is pretty obvious because of the intelligent use of white space. By increasing the line height, the text seems more manageable, more approachable. So I think it's quite evident that the space between our text lines isn't wasted at all. In fact, it brings lots of value to our design. You could argue that we gave up on some of our content. Fair point. On the other hand, would you have read that? How about most users? Everything has to have a clear purpose. Let's take a look at an example website. This is a great one. Now to play the other side, we'll take it like this. The whole menu could have been compacted to 1/5 of its current size. Look at all that empty space everywhere. No, that won't go. We have to fix it. We're losing precious space. The fold. Where's the fold? So much content underneath the fold. We have to fix it. How could we launch a site like this? And all this drawn-out text. Damn, if I get my hand on that designer guy. Plus, I can barely see the text, so we should make it much bigger, but take up less space. And we need even more text because of SEO, because I want to be #1 on Google. Google wants lots and lots of text so it can be indexed, so yeah, more text everywhere. Now, after a session like this, you'll most likely end up with a design that looks, well, you be the judge. On the flip side, you'll hear me say Theme Forest is the porn of web design due to its incredible attractiveness, yet unrealistic layouts. Most designers understand the need for good white space, but sometimes they take it overboard. If 10 is good, then 20 must be great, right? This principle does not apply to web design. Let's take a look at an example. This is not an extreme one, yet it's too much. The footer, for example, is, well, too empty, and I'm not being sarcastic. I believe this truly is a wasted opportunity. While I understand this wants to be upscale and luxurious, I don't believe a footer should look like that. The same can be said about the header. In our quest for minimalism, we sometimes get too ahead of ourselves. Looking at a post, we see the same line being followed. This is highly unreasonable because you'll most likely never come across a project like this in your design career. Of course, there are exceptions, but we have to be prepared for those cases we're going to get 90% of the time, not for a measly few percent that's reserved for the ultra-exclusive anyway. So, to sum it up, white space, symmetry, and consistent spacing are critical fundamentals you need to master before you move forward. Without this strong starting point, your designs won't be aesthetically pleasing, no matter how hard you work. Working with a brief. Briefs are what separate designers from mind readers. A brief is usually a document of some sorts that contains all relevant information about the project you're about to take. Usually, a good brief will have a wireframe attached to it, but it's not a rule by any means. You should expect to see the following: company name, company information, existing website if any, competitor websites, comments regarding how the site should be structured, a logo in vector or PNG format, and so on. When you ask for a brief outside a platform like 99 Designs, you can expect to see varying information. Some clients rely on very short briefs, thinking this won't limit your creativity. That or they might be lazy. On the flip side, some clients feel the need to compensate for that book they never wrote, so you can expect pages upon pages of every single detail in the website. Both options are terrible for us designers. What you need to do, again outside a platform, is to create a brief template of your own. This should include all the information you need to get started. I recommend you work on your own brief, both on presentation and content. I don't want to include an example of my own because this needs to be an individual thing, something you can put your own identity and branding upon. So take the time to create something visually appealing that also has everything you need. A simple Word document is fine, but you can also create something in Photoshop and export it as a PDF that can later be filled in by the client. The big question should always be asked: how many pages do you need? Provide a logo in a PNG or AI format. Do you have a preferred color scheme? Who are your competitors? Which of them have the best design? How about functionality? And so on. The idea is to get as much information as possible, but without forcing the client to take the whole day off to fill out your form. Think about the absolute musts in order to keep the time down to a minimum. Your form should be easy to understand, written in plain words without any over-extravagant design, preferably in a universal format like PDF or doc. Or you can use whatever you think works best for your client. These are almost universal though, so they're pretty safe. I understand some people are extremely busy and they don't have time to waste, but you always need something to work on besides a simple conversation. It's either a brief or a wireframe with a few links to the competitors' websites and maybe the existing website of the company. In case the client comes up with some excuses in order not to fill out the brief, you have two choices. You can drop the project because the client is clearly not a dream to work with, either too busy, too lazy, too arrogant, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Or the second choice is to considerably increase your quote in order to accommodate for the inevitable revision work you'll have to do. Either way, be prepared for a lot of stress. In most cases, you won't face situations like this, but if you find yourself too often under these circumstances, you might want to reconsider your approach. Maybe you're asking for way too much information. Maybe your brief has complicated terms. Maybe the design is too distracting, or possibly the client can't open up the document. Think about all these things if you see a pattern emerging. For example, if you see a block of text like this, you'll surely be discouraged to read it. If it were better formatted, things might be different. The same can be said about your brief. You can also simply ask for feedback on your document in case you have doubts about it. Most clients will be happy to give their 2 cents about it. I also need to mention one thing. There should be a clear distinction between a brief on a crowdsourcing platform like 99 Designs, CrowdSpring or even Odesk, Freelancer.com, Elance and so on, and one-on-one briefs. So if the client gives you a specific set of requirements, you should consider them more than the equivalent crowdsourcing site demands. This is because you have no competition. On the other hand, if 10, 50 or 100 other designers read the same brief, most of them will produce the same design. In that case, you need to come up with your own twist, with your own interpretation. Try and stand out from the crowd. Try and imagine what everybody else would do after reading the brief, and try one-upping them. It's critical you understand this point because otherwise you'll be left struggling. In both cases, though, I recommend you take the client's requests lightly. But even more so in the case of crowdsourcing projects. Simply put, you shouldn't give his brief too much credit. So if he asks for a Web 2.0 design, I might ignore that. Flat design? Again, I might ignore that as well. No stock photos? Why not? So I'd question everything based on my knowledge. I don't want to create a design custom-fitted to his ideas. Instead, I want to create an awesome tailor-made design for his business needs. Again, this doesn't imply I'm a business consultant or that I'm a specialist in that particular field. No. But if I've made 50 other websites like that one, you can bet your house I know a thing or two about it. This is where things get tricky and very hard to explain. You don't want to be arrogant, but you do have to use your judgment wisely. This is a matter of finesse and subtlety. The subject is so delicate I've never read any tips like this from anyone else. It's quite a harsh thing to say. Disregard the client's brief or wishes. It may come across as being arrogant, abrupt, or simply too harsh. But that's not what I'm saying. You should take his points into consideration. But at the end of the day, you have to use your own judgment and experience to make design decisions. Let's expand on the example I gave. The client says he doesn't want stock photos. He hates them. As a side note, this actually happened to me. After considering everything, I decided to use some very nice photos. Not your everyday cheesy shaking hands stock photos, but images from a website like Shutterstock nevertheless. The client loved it. He hated the tacky, overused ones that were all over the web, the ones with 5 business people in cheap suits, 1 black, 1 Hispanic, 1 Asian, 1 white, 1 woman, the one where they're all at a meeting. This is why I recommend you think twice before following the brief to the letter. I know this is something that's quite easy to misunderstand, but nevertheless it's an important part of being a freelancer and mastering web design. So, if it's a crowdsourcing website, don't give it too much credit, use it very loosely. If it's a personal client, give it more thought, but still don't follow it to the letter. So, to sum up, never work without a brief and/or a wireframe, and make sure you're asking for the right information in your document. Also, never get too hung up on the client's wishes. Instead, use your own experience and judgment. Working on a small project. In our line of work, clients tend to undersell their project. I'm sure you've heard at some point that it's just a small project, it'll only take you an hour or so, can you please do it for some peanuts and a glass of water? You have to acknowledge the fact that this is an inevitable part of your field. Clients aren't necessarily doing it on purpose, though I have seen cases. Rather, they don't have enough experience to methodically analyze each aspect that's put into a project. That's to be expected. You can't trust their assessment because it isn't based on any serious experience. It's up to you to have a clear stance on these so-called small projects and not act like a goldfish that forgets every few projects that clients might not give accurate descriptions. You have to dig for information to actually know if it truly is a small project or if it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. For example, on 99 Designs, there's no real difference in your workload between a $200 landing page and a $475 home page. Actually, there's no difference between the $475 pager and the $600 one. When you break it down, it's the same amount of work and stress, and that's because you need to go through the exact same steps. You have to carefully read the brief, get your inspiration, create an initial design, get at least 2 or 3 rounds of revision work, and so on. There's almost no difference between a landing page and a home page. Let me mention what a landing page is, just in case some of you don't know it. A landing page is usually an addition to the regular website that has one purpose: to obtain users' information. This is usually done through a prominent form that sits in the hero area, usually to the side. Landing pages are great when you set up a paid campaign of any sorts and you want to get the most out of it. Everything on that page should be directed towards converting the visitor into a lead, into a prospect, and to do that, you have to cut out everything else on the page. Only the main feature points should be present on that page. So going on this, clients or platforms like 99 Designs assume it's less work because it's less elements, right? On the contrary, it's at least the same amount of work, and I won't go into further details because I think it's pretty obvious. Going back to those mini projects, in general you should watch out for some special key features the client might ask for. For example, a hero area illustration. He may describe it as a simple city skyline with a smiling person on a telephone, but that means at least a few hours of initial work, then probably another concept, then another revision, then another one. It's these type of details that might be unforeseen when you initially take on the project. It's the same thing with custom graphics. Don't be surprised to see a big project come to a halt because of one image that doesn't fit the client's ideas. These can be an incredible pain, so make sure you're bulletproof against these possible issues. An initial discussion is key, but then ask for everything to be written down. Contracts are a good way of locking things in place, but a mere email is usually enough. The problem deepens when you have clients approach you that don't know you only create the design in Photoshop. I've heard about cases where the client was astonished when he received the PSD file. He was obviously expecting something else. This is 100% the designer's fault because he failed to mention these details. It's not all right to assume anything in this field. Every single detail must be discussed beforehand so you don't find yourself in awkward situations. Lastly, you should know that real small projects like a quick homepage may bring you lots more work in the future. So please don't think I'm completely against small projects. On the contrary, I think they have a big role in setting up your portfolio, getting your name out there, creating a network of clients. But that's not to say you should undersell your work or be taken for granted by a client. Make sure you're getting the price you deserve for your work before you start a project. Demanding for extra money in the middle of the design is one of the worst things you can do. So if you don't assess the project correctly, you may be stuck in an awful position. Plus, there's another side of the coin here. Some people simply refuse to take on small projects. Some designers work on projects starting from $2,000 to $3,000. Some start at $5,000 or even $10,000. The idea isn't so outrageous if you ask me. Instead of being split into several projects, constantly multitasking and arranging your schedule to fit several clients, you take a breather and focus 100% on one big important project. Obviously, it's extremely hard to ask $10,000 for a website design, especially in the beginning. But if you have the experience, a great portfolio, and a bit of good marketing, it can be done. Everything is based on your skill level, so that's the first thing you need to worry about. So to sum it up, watch out for projects that are described as small and quick when they're actually very tedious and labor-intensive. Always double-check the requirements before setting a quote.